Hi, everybody. Uh, I'm Morgan Schick. This is the new the new landscape of hospitality design. Thanks for coming. Um, Before I let the three people who actually know what they're talking about talk, wanted to give a little bit of a framework for what we're going to be discussing. Obviously, the inspiration for the seminar was the massive changes that have happened to our industry because of the pandemic. And when we started conceiving of this, we were even more firmly lodged in the pandemic than we still are. And it was the time when there was a bit of optimism even that we would come out of this with a whole new system, and that it was laying bare all of the flaws in the process and in the industry, and that we would rise from the ashes with this entirely new structure and new labor models and new designs and new ways of doing business. And I think that now we're seeing that that's probably not going to be the case, unfortunately, which is the long way of saying we don't have a lot of answers for you in this. So what we're trying to do is to sort of lay out what the issues are and what some potential approaches are, but also understanding that that's sort of the fundamentals of design anyway, is that the questions are, in a lot of cases, more important than the answers. Also, to get us started, as we're thinking about a lot of these details and how people interact with a space, there's a concept called behavioral immunization, which is the natural way that we as human beings avoid situations that are going to make us sick. So examples of this are you're not going to hug somebody who has open sores. And if you walk into a room that smells like noxious gases, you're not going to go into it. And these are all ways to keep our immune system from having to do the extra work. And like most systems, it doesn't work right all the time. And there's two ways that systems can work wrong. One is that they give false positives, and one is that they give false negatives. And like a smoke alarm where you'd rather have it go off when you're cooking a steak than not go off when your house is on fire, your behavioral immune system tends to overreact. This, when it's too far extreme, leads to agoraphobia and fear of germs and all these things. But I think we're seeing it happening now when you walk into a space and how you react to it, because we're also attuned to the idea of a space being dangerous. And so a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today, you can think about it in these terms. It's that they're the design cues to make people start to feel comfortable again being in public and being in spaces together. So, introduce everybody here. Maybe. All right. From my left, that's Kevin Dietrich from Pacific Cocktail Haven and Kona's in San Francisco. Kevin, you want to say hi?
Yeah, as Morgan just pointed out, my name is Kevin Dietrich from San Francisco and PCH and Konas. I've been in the industry over 20 years. So bartender, owner of PCH. We opened that back in 2016, and Konas last year in the pandemic. That's not much, but we'll try and keep it short.
Yeah. Kevin was asked to be here because he had the unfortunate process of having to reopen one of his bars after the pandemic. And so taking his design cues and the decisions that he had to make to redo a place in this new world. And then to his left is Tina Ross.
Hi, I'm Tina Ross. I own a design company called Sodaback. I specialize in graphic and now interior design for bars, but I actually have 13 years of experience in hospitality. While I was in college studying for my degree, I bartended and fell in love with this world, and so I kind of have experience on both sides of the bar, and I've been doing graphic design for bars, restaurants, hotels, and as you know, those all shut down during the pandemic, so I decided to go back to school and study interior architecture. And it was really interesting because the first thing that all the teachers asked was, are you ready to design for the next pandemic? And so I think that was kind of a cool experience to have had and to bring to this panel.
And lastly, there's Sam Millen down at the end.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Sam. I have founded a company called Behind Bars. We produce bar stations. I'm from Australia, based in Oslo. Before we started this company, I was a bartender for about 17 years. And we bring a really kind of bartender focus, I guess, to bar station design. And we work with everybody from huge hotel chains to some of the top bars in the world to, guys who are just starting out investing in their first bar. So we're really, I think since 2016, we've probably delivered about 300 stations. So worked with 300 groups of people on their unique venues and been really kind of fortunate enough to be part of that collaboration. So really seen how this pandemic has affected all different types of venues and all have different challenges, which we'll talk about a little bit today. I'd like to thank all of you guys for coming and just, parting with your hard-earned money to listen, and I hope that you get a lot of good information from us. Thank you.
All right. To start off, talk a little bit about just design in general for the hospitality space. And Tina, would you like to walk us through a little bit of the process that you go through when you're conceiving of designing a bar or restaurant?
Yeah, is this gonna touch on what our design theory is a little bit?
Please.
Okay, so here's an example of a bar that I worked on. I did the interior and graphic design for it, and we actually opened it up during the pandemic. And one of the key things about design is that it's a science. It's not necessarily art forward, first and foremost. And that, understanding what the needs of your community are whether it's their demographic, their ages, just what the city needs, what the neighborhood needs. And so this is an example of a natural wine bar that we opened up in 2021, so it was like in the middle of the pandemic, which was I'm sure Kevin will attest, is a really fun thing designing a bar during a pandemic. But this is an example of how, there isn't always the most positive association with wine bars, and we wanted to sort of change that perspective a bit and make, all natural wine feel very approachable. And so throughout the branding and the space, it was really important that we kind of just make it bright and comfortable and almost like a conversation piece that you can have with your guests. So a lot of the branding here, this is for a bar in Sacramento called Rochambeau. The idea is that a lot of times when you're faced with, trying wine, it's almost like a eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Like if you're not a connoisseur, you might not know what to go with. And we just wanted to get rid of that sort of stigma against it and just sort of be more of like a guiding light for that. And so it starts with the graphics being a little bit of, almost like a fortune telling, using the Rochambeau hands, and then that carried over into, if you see the postcard in the center, that's for the wine club that we actually designed to help facilitate to-go sales during the pandemic, so we can have a little extra of a revenue stream. But the whole idea behind that is, let's make it fun. They call it the WWF, it's the Wino Wrestling Federation, and so all of the branding on that side of the sub-brand is extremely playful, extremely approachable. And then when it comes into the interior design for the main bar, it was just really important for us to make the space feel comfortable, make it feel lived in. This was, especially during the pandemic, it's a time where people maybe just want somewhere that feels like home. And so we utilized a lot of different textures and plants and, the beautiful wall there, we juxtapositioned it with, that's an old wall, and the contrast of old is new, and that's always good in design. And so, yeah, you guys should check out this bar, it's great.
After all of that, I want to focus back on I think, the first thing you said, which is the difference between design as a science and design as an art. And I think that that's probably especially true in the hospitality field because the spaces have to be used so much more than if you're designing a home or something. So do you other fellas have any thoughts about just sort of the way that you approach designing a space for actual use, both by the staff and the guest?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like Tina was pointing on is definitely during the pandemic was trying to make people feel comfortable, right? It was all about distancing and also having something familiar. So it's when we redesigned PCH after the fire, so PCH burned it down last year of February. So we had an opportunity to rebuild it in a different space. So the design on that, on trying to think forward in terms of keeping people comfortable. You'll eventually see a slide of a picture of PCH, the old PCH and the new PCH. So the old PCH is all the black and black. It was like this moody, very narrow shotgun style bar. And the new space is a little wider now, which is on the right side. So, and the same contrast of trying to keep the bar on the right-hand side for when you come in, because after the fire, we wanted something familiar for people to come in. So it's just having that familiar sense of someone to be able to come in and have a sense of familiarity and comfort. And then also the design, you can see the banquettes, we kind of made curvatures into them to create that intimate moment, because hospitality and bar experiences are all about experience, right? We're in the experience business. So instead of just having, we were restricted by buying an existing bar with these banquettes were just kind of L'd out in the old space. So the new space was creating these little textures and these little cubby holes for people to be comfortable and have that intimate moment instead of just staring at a bar. Like if you're just on a banquet seating, you're staring straight ahead. You're either staring at the bar or you're staring at people's butts. So we tried to create these little creative like cubbies where you're forcing people to stare at each other. So that's kind of what we did over there. Oh.
It sounds like they're having more fun over there if anybody wants to switch.
We understand.
Sam, the aspect and one of the reasons that we asked you to be here was because of your expertise in the other aspect of designing a restaurant space, which is that it has to be a place that actually produces food and drinks. Do you have any sort of overarching thoughts, philosophies about how you make a space that's actually usable?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the pillars of our company, the design part of the company, are that the bar station needs to satisfy three groups. The bartender absolutely needs to have a workspace that is comfortable and fun to work in, that they can execute the concept that is placed in front of them. So our best designs always have the people who will use the stations at the table. Also, the owner or the person who's paying for the station, who's investing, they need to see a return on their investment. Closer. Okay, sorry. So the owner needs to see a return on their investment. So the bar station needs to, we think very much of the bar station as a kind of revenue generating piece of steel. So we delve quite deeply into, how is this piece of furniture or machinery or station going to, produce enough money to keep the lights on. And thirdly, we need to think about the guests. So, a well-designed bar station will absolutely impact onto the guest experience. So I think that COVID, I think in all the points, what this pandemic has really done is forced us to bring into quite sharp focus, for us especially, these three things, and how are we going to rethink these perspectives so that we can meet these challenges, because COVID has thrown up a lot of challenges. One of the things that we talk a lot about with, if we look again at the bartender, something that is cropping up among our clients from all different types of fields is staff attraction and staff retention. How can we attract the good people and how can we keep them? Because the industry has been, decimated of good people, because what normally tends to happen is that people who are very good bartenders, those skills are really transferable, So a lot of really good people have gone to other industries, and we think a lot about how can we design our stations so that it's a good place to work for bartenders. And our best designs absolutely are when the people, as I mentioned before, when the people using the stations will be sitting around stations. The people who will be working at the stations are sitting around the design table and actually can have input, because it creates a really powerful sense of ownership, I think. For the owner, they are really looking at maximum output for minimum input. You know, this pandemic has really, forced us to rethink the way we operate a lot of times. So, for example, fewer bar staff, more floor staff. What does that mean for a traditional bar station? There's something that needs to be, rethought there a little bit. And then finally, the guest. I think that this pandemic has really hurt bars, especially because so much of the experience is interaction, right, between guest, and guest bartender. So people have been coming to us during the pandemic and saying, how can we design the space to reignite that spark? As I said, I'm based in Europe, so I think that in Scandinavia, UK, and places like that, we're a little bit further out of the pandemic than some states maybe here in the US. And the focus is very much on how do we get back to that those golden days of going to bars and having these interactions with other guests, not necessarily just the people we came with, but those random interactions that, really make a bar so unique, or make bars so unique and so important in our society. So some of the images you see up on the screen. This is a bar that we designed in Moscow called Insider, and this was designed before the pandemic, but as you can see, the design is a little bit unique in that it's a center island with 3 stations, and in between each station is seating for 2 guests. So it's only 6 seats, right? They've got other seating as well, but what actually happened during the pandemic in Moscow was that they had restrictions that you had to sit 2 people. I'm not sure if it was the same here, but you had the groups that you came in, it was 2 people. So this worked really well. It still allowed them to operate their kind of centerpiece really, really nicely. I don't know if you want to go to the next slide.
Sure.
Here we have 2 bars in London. One is Taya and Elementary. They closed down for a while, like many places did, and their bar station, this is the one on my right. I guess you guys are seeing the same as me. No, you're left. No, you're right. Sorry. They have a center island bar here, so they're working 2 bartenders facing one another, so 4 bartenders all together producing drinks, and they kind of pivoted to RTDs, so batching and selling their cocktails in bottles. And this station was easily transformed into a kind of working area and prep area, which is really cool. And then the final image there is another bar in London called Soma, which is an amazing cocktail bar. And this was designed during the pandemic, but installed just at the tail end of the UK lockdowns, and is really, really focused on guest interaction. What you can't see there, it's a 9-meter long table with guests sitting along either side, opposite one another. And in the middle of that steel table is kind of shared wine wells, or ice wells, to put bottles in. And that was really, really, we put a lot of thought into that. The width of the table is kind of the perfect width that you can interact with the person across, but you don't need to. And the wine wells kind of create this piece where, if two groups or a few groups are putting their bottle in the same well, it's an automatic conversation starter, which is really great, because it gives people a kind of easy in to start to speak with other people. And I think that those type of mechanisms create really great memories, which is why guests kind of come back to a venue.
Kevin, when you were working on the rebuild of PCH, did you think about being able to run the same amount of service with fewer guests, with fewer staff?
That's a great question. I think that's something that we're all dealing with as operators and bar managers and staff in front of the house. staff is shortages. So I think we are in a exponentially bigger space. The original space was coded for 48. We're closing to about 68 inside and 30 in the courtyard. And the models now the previous models don't work in terms of your labor models moving forward. I think we were kind of playing with the labor model still, because we went from a very small staff to a very big staff in terms of 4 bartenders and 3 and 1 person on the floor at the old space, and now we're 3 people on the floor, 4 bartenders and a bar back. And the numbers sometimes don't justify, so you're trying to do, moving forward and thinking about your design and everything, is trying to do more with less, which is really hard to do, because what you end up doing is compromising service and hospitality when you're trying to do a lot more with less people. So a lot of it was like trying to design stations and the way behind the bar to do a lot more out of one little station, and duplicate those throughout, so you can almost run with 3 bartenders in a bigger space but have more people on the floor. I think you touched it with that a little bit earlier, which is just like that model now is trying to pump out as much as possible with less staff, because you don't know. I think we've been open 3 months and we haven't had a full month that we've had everybody on staff. Like every other week is someone else out. So it's again trying to do more with less right now, which is hard.
I'm going to click back, because Tina, I'd like you to walk through a little bit of your space design sorry, here we go. So this is a layout for a new space, as I understand, right?
Yes. So one of the projects that we're going to show later on, it was a pivot project that did so well that we're actually looking to turn it into a brick and mortar and actual physical space. So unfortunately, this location didn't work out, but we had already started doing some of the floor plans and the adjustments that we felt were essential in order to, be successful if there were to be another pandemic. And kind of touching upon the first project I showed, that's another example where we're actually opening our second location, and we've decided to capture half of the parking lot and just really focus on a good outdoor space, kind of like a Bacchanal wine area, because, with the existence of Uber and scooters and this city is such a highly biked city, it didn't make sense to keep the parking lot when we could transform that space into somewhere people now actually want to be. People like dining outside. So I just wanted to touch on that project as well. We're actually working on it right now, and we're building it this year, so it's very exciting. This one, hopefully we'll find an eventual location, but this was for a pivot called Snug Junior, and we'll touch on it later on. But essentially, one of my clients' bars was an Irish pub, and it's all indoors, and at the beginning of the pandemic, it just wasn't going to survive. And we did the pivot, and I'll get to that again, but this is the future space. And so what was really important for us during the pandemic was to be able to offer to-go food and to be able to offer outdoor service. So within this floor plan, on the back right corner, there's actually like a walkway, and next to the building is an alleyway. So we will have a permanent to-go window there, so that if something were to happen, or even just for efficient service, there's a designated area for the guests to go. Another key feature we did was an indoor-outdoor bar. So it's actually split in half on the indoors, half on the outdoors. So it allows adequate airflow throughout the space. But then it also is kind of a cool advertisement for, people walking down the street and being able to see like some of our liquor collection and some of the activity going on inside of this space. Another key feature is on the patio side, we did single-sided banquettes so that the seating is always adjustable. For the indoor-outdoor bar, on the bottom right side, you'll see there's on the actual 3D rendering, there is like a dark rectangular panel. That's actually an indoor-outdoor service well, so that when we open up the patio or extend the patio, you can actually have servers who can access cocktails from the bar. And then lastly, there's a lot of different areas that have just sort of rails, especially on the exterior here, just sort of like a sandwich rail to help facilitate that sort of outdoor dining, essentially, as there's actually a sidewalk pathway that we wouldn't be able to occupy. So we just wanted to maximize the different types of seating arrangements and try to make it as comfortable as possible, so that in the event there was another lockdown, we could actually pivot more easily in that scenario. And then depending on where you are and what the restrictions are, we're able to sort of adjust the space within.
Something that I think is interesting about this layout that you've done is that it has a lot of physical barriers to separate people without it feeling enclosed. And I mean, as I think we all learned at some point, those little plexiglass things between tables actually didn't do anything at all. But they do have the psychological benefit of making it feel like you're not right up against each other. And in this, you've sort of managed that same thing without a big ugly slab of plexiglass. And Kevin, you kind of achieved the same thing with your new banquettes at the new PCH. And sort of similarly, I think that there's going to be a lot of ways that we funnel people as we lose, that guest to staff interaction is being shrunk, as you said, Sam, that it's like, it's going to be one person serving a ton of people, and so you're not going to have as much of a one-on-one interaction with your bartender, and maybe we're not going to squeeze as many people into our spaces, and so you need to facilitate the feeling of that bustle and that connectivity sort of by faking it, right? By like making people see each other better without necessarily having to touch each other. So.
Yeah, I wish we had a better picture of the courtyard here, because we now have a courtyard that fits about 30 people for PCH. What you're missing on this picture is the entranceway, which is about a 30-foot entryway to the front door of PCH. But on either side, we've installed living walls, which is my bar manager's nightmare. Over 193 plants out there that he has to take care of, but he does it very well. It's still alive, I think. But what you're missing on both sides is kind of like the same thing with, we have banquettes on either side that are on the entryway that create little distances and creates moments for people for comfortability. I think that's the number one thing we're trying to force home and the design for the future. Like when Tina told me that her class is telling you to design things for the next pandemic, it's very scary to think about that we're going to go through this again. And the optimist I want to think it's not going to happen, but we're still not out of it, and we're still trying to figure out another revenue streams and rewriting business models for it. But here in the design here is, what I was trying to say is the courtyard is very similar to what Tina was talking about, was just like having that comfortable level and having people spaced out, but able to kind of move things around. Like we can move these tables around and the little coffee tables that are next to the banquettes. So,
Sam, when you're thinking about these new projects that you're working on, how are you thinking about moving people through the space at all? Are you working on mostly seated bars?
I mean, our focus is really the bar stations, but what we're seeing is that, with this reimagined way of working, this kind of different operation where, as you talked about, where 3 bartenders become 1, where 2 servers become 5, or whatever that may be, it's forced us to rethink a little bit how we design our stations, because, the operation has changed. So a real focus on the pass, for example, a real focus on pickup. How are these drinks going to move through the venue? How are things going to be picked up? What is the technology that needs to happen so that people don't have all those people that would normally be at the bar that are now ordering? I mean, what do you do with the tickets? Do you use those steel rails with the marbles, or do you have a kind of like a digital kind of pickup system, or like ticket system? So, but it has to be said that everybody has one eye on the golden future. So there has to be some kind of element of flexibility, and there has to be an element of that we have to be very aware not to design something that will not work when things change, if that makes sense. And that's difficult. That's really difficult, because obviously a steel bar station is once it's there, it's an investment, it's there. So, we spend a lot of time in the office talking about flexibility of stations, which is really fun, super fun, to be able to think about how can we use this station in many ways. How can this station be more than just the piece of steel to produce the drinks at nighttime? Can it be other things? Does it need to be other things? So I think in that way, we're seeing an evolution of the bar station, which is exciting for us. I mean, we're bar station nerds, right? Not everybody is into bar stations like we. We're a small piece of a big puzzle. But yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot of different innovative ways of getting volume into people's hands. So we're working with a project in Oslo where they went down the route of putting a draft tower on each table, and then you could prepay for whatever came out of that tower, be it 5 liters of beer, you'd prepay it, and then you tap it until it's out, or if it's Fernet, or if it's the mojito they have, or wine or champagne, and that seems to work really well. The group gets in, they sit, they pay, they drink, they drink more, they leave. Right? You never have to have a bartender. But as you mentioned, you know, what does that do to the kind of the soul of the venue, where you know the interaction and the education and that kind of relationship between guest and bartender is under threat. So something that we've seen also is kind of it's interesting. But we had a real in November last year we released a couple of really sexy bar trolleys with you know, integrated water systems, so you could wash your tins and things like that. But table service with the trolley, so you can still give that was allowed, you know, to come to the guest with a bar trolley and give them that service. And I think that those kind of
Was that the same venue that did it? Sorry, was that the same venue that you did it?
That was
the
not
tap one.
that was not the same venue.
Okay.
That was not the same venue. Made me lose my train of thought.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Sam. You're talking about the trolley.
No, yeah. So I thought that was interesting. That you know, in all of these kind of times of kind of hardship, and how you know how we're going to move forward, that these new ways of working come out of it. And I think the future is uncertain, but I think that there's opportunity there as well, which I think we'll touch on later on.
I think speaking sort of visually, it seems like one of the ways to correct for sort of the lack of physical interaction is to make the space more lush and more like visually engaging. We're about to talk about printed materials, but this is just sort of a prediction for the future, is that as we have fewer staff and fewer people and more space, that we see a move away from like minimalist interiors, which really are like a canvas for the food and the drink and the interaction, and move into filling a space with more stuff to make it feel lively, use the lighting to focus on other people and the artwork and so on, instead of just making people make their own energy.
I mean, that's a great point. And again, I didn't give enough pictures for PCH, but the front side of the bar of PCH has 85 lights hanging from it, which is an electrician's nightmare of 85 J boxes. But it's visually stunning. So it's just like going back. Yeah, you can't really see it, but there's like 85 lights above the bar, which is visually stunning. So it's, again, what Morgan's, just to touch on what Morgan's saying, is like giving people the visual keys to take things in, and like have little touch points. Like we even did it in the Yield space too, where the very back walls an art mural that's actually just a cocktail menu of bag of luggage tags. So it's definitely like the minimalism isn't there in the new space, because we just wanted to make something stunning and a conversation piece for it.
And I think also really quick, touching on the materials that you actually use in the space help when you use things that are a little bit more familiar to people. Like for Rochambeau, that design, we used a lot of wood and a lot of just approachable textures that make people feel comfortable, things that they can relate to in their own homes even.
And how do you, when you're thinking, we haven't talked about this at all, but when you're thinking about that kind of material choice, how do you balance the comfort with the need for durability, right? Because FRP stands up, but nobody likes being in a room that's covered with FRP.
That's the next new bar. It's the FRP bar. It's FRP. It's so easy to clean. We like 50 floor drains
I
and
mean-
FRP everywhere, just
You
spray
and,
down the whole
you
bar.
and your acronym bars.
It doesn't look bad with wallpaper sometimes. You know, you can make it
That's
work
why the
if you
name for the
have
bar,
to.
FRP. It's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you can get things custom built, like your banquettes or your seating, it's always going to be stronger and last longer. You know? And then, you know, using materials that are not only safe and to code, you know, making sure you're using the right flooring. It has to be to code. It can't be too slippery in an environment where there's a lot of liquids around. You know, just making sure you're using the right stuff.
So another aspect of this, and Tina, you touched on this a little bit in your introduction to yourself, but we think about designing a restaurant or a bar. So much of it is making sure that all of the elements talk to each other, right? So it's like that the design of the back bar facilitates the style of service that fits the look of the space, that fits the menus and the logos and the music and the lighting. And one of the biggest things that we saw happening during the pandemic was this move to digital menus. Another one of those things that it turns out didn't keep us any safer, but now they're here. So I know that we could probably spend the next 45 minutes each in turn complaining about how much we hate digital menus. But we should also realize that there are some benefits to them, some of which I hate and some of which are actually nice. I've heard people talking about being able to use them to produce surge pricing, essentially, which is one of the ones that I hate. But also, it's faster, it's easier, it's cheaper. If anyone has experience printing paper menus for your bar and then doing your P&L at the end of the month, it's a massive cost. On the screen here, you'll see two examples on the left of digital menus that don't work very well. On the left is one that is functionally perfectly useful, but has no personality, right? You don't get a feel for what that space is. It could be one of the airport iPad ordering systems. And on the right of that, that's actually just a picture of my own phone from a tapas bar, which they just digitized their existing menu, and it was entirely illegible. And then to the right of that, we've got two examples of Rochambeau's menu, both their original printed menu and then the digitized version. So Tina, do you want to walk us through what your thought process was in digitizing?
Yeah. First, I wanted to comment on the first one, the Opica. We actually, a few of my clients used something similar to this when it was a different phase in the pandemic, when it was all contact-free. And so two of the projects I did that were pivots, this was our solution at that time. It actually worked because it allowed guests to see photos of the drinks, see how much they cost, place the order. You know, there was a typical QR code at their table that they would order from, and you know, it made sense for the time, but it didn't make sense, you know, as the pandemic progressed, people were getting vaccinated. We wanted to have a bit of a return to normalcy, of course. A lot of the times with my clients, I will design the print and the digital no matter what nowadays. You know, if hotel clients especially they just have to have it up on their website because the guidelines it seems like they're really on top of the guidelines, and everything's so constantly changing that for them, they just always need to have it on the website, even if they are doing digital as well. So a lot of times I'll set up my InDesign files with, you know, the print ready and the digital, and sometimes they'll have to deal with both, unfortunately, for the time, but it's what works. And the example, this kind of goes back to the concept of Rochambeau, us trying to make drinking wine and discovering natural wines a bit more approachable. You know, this is a very simple menu. Menus don't have to be overly complicated. You know, it's very to the point. Right at the top, you know, it's daily wine, $6 for half a glass, $12 for a full glass. And the idea, even just with the pricing, is that we just wanted to introduce people to these different wines, and everything's broken down very easily into different categories by, varietal. There are tasting notes, and it's just simple to the point. And then down below they have, budget ballers and specials, just trying to make everything easy to navigate with your eye. Starting from the top, understanding the pricing, going down and recognizing that the color changes mean a different type of information that's being provided. Creating focal points by using the bolder fonts that are in a darker color. And then when that is translated to most likely on a cell phone, kind of condensing the menu to being like your typical 1080 pixels wide that you would do an Instagram post, so that it always holds up and it's easy to, if they do need to zoom in, it's very easy and they're not just scrolling across the page. I don't know if you guys have experienced that, where you're trying to navigate the menu and you just keep scrolling back and forth from side to side. And so just keeping it single, streamlined, single column when it's mobile, but being prepared that if the guidelines change or a lockdown were to happen again, you have that file in your back pocket, the digital version.
Kevin, have you guys using QR code menus?
Yes, I mean, I could complain about QR codes for another 45 minutes. But yeah, like the first one and the QR codes and everything was what we all had to do, the transition, right? Was QR codes to scan to see a menu, because we weren't allowed to give printed menus out because printed menus spread COVID. But we experienced the QR code, and we tried to quickly get out of the QR code hell, because we found that QR codes were just, it made us turn into robots. Like, a lot of it was like we were using a system that the QR code, you'd scan it, it would take you online, you could order the drink, and then the drink printed on the service bar printer, and then we'd print it, and we'd drop it off. And then we just turned it into robots in terms of, again, trying to connect to hospitality, right, and engaging people and talking to people. So we transitioned back to printed menus, and then we use the QR code just for the spirits menu. So we'll put a QR code on the back of the menu that says you can scan it to see the back of the menu, because our back bar is huge. So that kind of helps in terms of like printing menus, because every time you buy a new bottle for the back bar, you don't have to print out another 60 pages for your spirit book menu. Now you just get to update the QR code and send it back out and print. And you don't even have to update the QR code, you just have to update your inventory. So that's how we use the QR code now. We still put out these nice menus for people to steal.
Tina, is there any way to make a QR code look cool?
It's $1.99 a month. It's a subscription, and you can put your little logo right in the middle of the QR code, but that's about it.
This is, I think none of the four of us really have much of a background in digital design, but I found this quote from an article in the Roca Gallery. This was talking specifically about urban design, but it says, "Today we have the technological capacity to engineer beyond the functional to serve the experiential as well. The same smart technologies that are used to optimize urban processes can support spontaneous surprises. They can bring to life enchanting experiences and help connect people with each other in the physical world. The magic of coming together, of sharing improbable encounters, generates surprise and delight." What I like about that is the article is about how to design public spaces like parks and playgrounds without having physical contact. But I like the idea there that we can take this thing that is such a, the QR code scanned menus that we all have such a visceral reaction against, but that there are ways that we can use existing UX technology to make that a moment of excitement in the service process. And much as I hate the idea of having your prices change throughout the day, are there ways that you guys can think of that this interaction can actually be fun for people?
You're asking, are the QR codes fun? Or
I know that they're not yet, but
You could rickroll your guests. Makes it fun. Like, let's just make a joke out of it at this point.
I mean, I think there's a couple ideas. I mean, I talked to Rand, just having a QR code that you do like an art piece work, and you put a QR code in the art piece work, and it takes you to the brand's website or a brand's cocktail menu or something. So, I mean, I think there's cool ways to use QR codes to engage your guests and not disengage them in terms of just like putting, where they say surprise and delights around your bar. In terms of QR codes, because that could be something just engaging as a conversation of being like, find the QR code, because it takes you to a secret menu, because we all like secrets.
Just to contrast a little bit what you guys are talking about, we're working with a client in the UK, and they're a massive beer hall. It's like 1,000 people capacity. They do their own beer, but they also do other beers. It's craft beer, and it's very interesting because at that number of people, it's really operational challenges that a lot of places don't have. And what they have seen since the pandemic is that they're now doing 60% of their sales through QR code, even though guests can now come to the bar. And their concept is not about bartender-guest interaction. So they're thinking, they're seeing this amazing opportunity now, but going back to the kind of operational way of working, it's totally shifted for them. They're now looking forward into the future and thinking post-pandemic, we can have our entry-level staff coming in as essentially runners for beer. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a huge amount of skill that takes to carry one of those huge trays full of beer. But the bartenders can pump out beers. It may be boring, but they're not doing high level service, and they're not doing high level drinks. So I think that they serve a purpose, and I think that for all different types of venues, not kind of smaller cocktail bars, they probably work to kind of completely undermine the concept. But for bigger venues, bigger capacity, bigger things like this, I think they absolutely have a place. We'll see. Sorry.
So they scan the QR code, and the QR code takes the order, and then it prints it, and then they just run it, right?
Exactly. So they've got it's a huge hall. It was meant to be a brewery, but they brew somewhere else. But the classic. They've got the QR code sticky taped to the tables, and people come in and order. I mean, the British culture is very much sharing rounds of drinks as well. So they do pitches and things like that, but it works really well. But they've redesigned their entire station with a real focus on now the service bar. How can we have this service station now is the busiest station by far. So how can we rethink the space so that the service can access, that the bartender can produce, and everything is in order, because it's a different logistic, right? When you have this huge pickup kind of system going on, but I mean their revenues will be much bigger than they were before, and there's it solves some issues for them as well around staffing, because they can bring people in and they can train them quite quickly to carry trays, and then progress them up as they get experience.
It seems like too. I'm personally still in the process of being dragged kicking and screaming into knowing anything about digital design, but it seems like there are opportunities there for animation in the process, pop-ups, that sort of thing, and part of it is that there's so much information that's conveyed by walking into a space and seeing what the bartender is doing and talking to the bartender. If they're in the weeds and you're going to wait 10 minutes for your drink, that's okay if you walk in and you see there's 13 shakers set up in the well, because you say, okay, well, they're really busy. And that you don't get that if you're sitting at your table having scanned a QR code. But there's so much functionality within the world of that tech that it seems like there are ways that you can start to put that information into the process, so that it's not just looking at a scanned PDF of a menu and clicking a button.
I wanted to comment that it's always going to come back to who your customers are and who your target audience is. And in your example, it makes complete sense. But in a space where it's a cocktail bar, you have to know what your guests are going to want, the experience that they're going to want to have. So again, always goes back to the target audience. One thing I did want to comment on QR code-wise is one of my projects I worked on, it was for the Fairmont in Puerto Rico, and they have like a beach club, and it's a very, pool-heavy hotel. And they gave out wristbands to all of the hotel guests that had QR codes across the wristband so that you could easily access information about the spa or make reservations at a hotel in the restaurant. And so it was actually a really clever way of just providing information so that it's kind of just upselling, really, just reminding your guests that, we have these resources and the information and access is there.
So we've talked about this a few times. It's popped up in this conversation so far, was the pivots that we had to make during the pandemic, and then building some of these pivotable ideas into future designs, both for, when we all have to shut down for monkeypox, and also just that one of the things that we've learned is that it's nice to be able to have 3 revenue streams from a bar instead of 1. So Tina, do you want to walk us through this particular pivot that you referenced earlier?
Yeah, so this is the Irish Pub De Vere's in Sacramento, and again, had to do a hard shutdown at the beginning of the pandemic. And as the client there was sort of figuring out, what kind of pivots we should do, I think, everyone was doing bottled cocktails, et cetera, but what we realized is that, the pivot should be more than just the product that we already have. We could have easily just served Irish food to go, but we had to think about what people were feeling at the time and what they were actually needing. And they weren't needing Irish pub food, they were needing just comfort food for the most part, something easy, quick, not too expensive. And so we actually transformed the image of the lobby that became sort of like a ordering window so that guests can go in. And this was one of the examples where it was contact-free ordering at first. We had a big A-frame sign that said like, "Hey boomer, scan this," so that we could start educating the guests on this new process of ordering. So making sure that you create, the right concept for the people, but then, we had the learning curve of providing adequate signage because it was this educational moment that we had to sort of guide people. And so even across all the windows, we just had like, scan here with like a big QR code and like an explanation of like why we were doing this concept and how we just wanted to share something delicious and inexpensive with the community. And so because of, I think we did this was 2020, it just made sense. And this is the example that I was speaking about earlier, that it did so well that we're looking for a permanent location now. And even in, the actual design style of this, it's a bit loud. It's a bit, it was meant to grab your attention and not be taken too seriously. And, we mimicked some old school burger ads from like the 70s and the 80s from like Burger King. And, it's called Snug Junior, as of course like Carl's Jr., but one of the other bars that the client owns is called the Snug. And so it was just, providing something that we felt people needed. And it was great because it was, an alternate revenue stream for the closed Irish pub, and it did really well.
Sam, are you seeing your clients come to you with requests for building in other revenue streams into their existing models?
Yeah, absolutely. So something that we see a lot from venues is, this bar station needs to do more than one thing. It needs to be a cafe in the daytime, and in the nighttime we're going to do cocktails. Something very relevant in the hotel industry now is how can we use our space more effectively, rather than having a breakfast room that's busy for 2 hours and a hotel bar that's busy for 2 hours. How can we make a space that is actually relevant and a destination, and how can the bar station or the piece of furniture accommodate that? Because a breakfast buffet or whatever it may be is going to be very different from a bar that is expected to do genuinely high-end cocktails and give good service. So absolutely, we're seeing that, and that is super exciting, because all of a sudden, the brief from the client is, give me something different than I can find. So
yeah, we're seeing that a lot.
Do you have I mean, I had a question. Just, do you have an example of how a station you can transform a station from a bar station into something else, or like an example of a client being, well, when the station's open, we need to just do cocktails, but then we need the station design do it different for doing cocktails like to go, because when you do cocktails to go, you're amping up your volume almost tenfold, 112.
Definitely. So two good examples. One bar that we did in Barcelona called Two Schmucks. They wanted to do cafe in the morning, right? And this is very simple. This is nothing revolutionary, but they had a double station bar, and they wanted to, in the daytime, they wanted to cover that one of the stations with the same material as the guest stop, so the guests could sit all the way around, and they could just do coffees. You know, people could sit with their laptops and whatnot. And then when they wanted to shift, they just lifted that plate off, and it became a higher volume bar. The other example, I guess, is in 2019, I guess, we worked with a couple of bartenders and friends in London, Alex Kratena, Monica Berg, and we developed this Taya station, which is essentially a big well with a series of interlocking hexagons that can be, I don't know if you want to flick back to the picture, which is of those bars. We can use this one. This is not Taya Elementary, the venue, but this is the system here. I don't know if you can see it well, but each station is kind of hexagons that can be turned either to create neutral space or to create working surface. So you can really make, this could be a 100% flat, drained, plumbed working area for things like batching and things like that. Or you can rotate and remove the hexagons to make it into ice wells, bottle wells, things like that. So these type of things, there's other examples in other stations of how we've tried to kind of incorporate this same thinking in that how can an element of a station be more than one thing? So how can something be both a well, for auxiliary ice well, for example, or a working surface by removing and rotating pieces, if that makes sense. I wish it was my idea, but Monica and Alex, they came to us with this concept, and they you can check it out on our website. It's www, and you can read all about it, but it's a really inspired system. A lot of people are very unsure about exactly how it would work. But if there's anyone interested, let me know, and I will show you how it works.
Kevin, you opened Kona's, like an hour and a half before the pandemic, and then got to reopen PCH later. Were there lessons from the, rigidity of the structure at Kona's that you fixed in the reopening of PCH?
I'd say a few. I mean, we had designed Kona's 2 years before us being able to open it. So then once the gears got going, it was really hard to stop it and kind of sit back and redesign it for the pandemic. So it was already a bar that was designed for, it's located kind of in the financial district of San Francisco and a block from the convention center. So it was originally designed to just be packed in and everything to that sort. So after the business kind of tanked in FIDI, and it's still not all that great, I got the opportunity to rebuild PCH in a different space. So it was kind of thinking of the design, because I wanted a bigger bar top. So the one at Kona's is a little more narrow, so creating more space on the actual bar top for the guests, and for the option of if we would have to do food again. We don't serve food at PCH, but during the pandemic we had to serve food because food and cocktails together ward off COVID. Yes. But it was like creating these things for the future. So if we had to do food again, it was giving the option of having a bigger bar top for food. Because at Kona's we don't serve food, but it was a narrow bar top, and I wanted to have more options for people for the future, for if something would ever to happen again.
And as we're thinking about this, this is a open question to all three of you. Tina, you talked a little bit about designing for the next pandemic and designing these pivots in. Do you think that we're now thinking about designing spaces to be 30-year businesses, or are we designing them to be 5-year businesses? In the sort of traditional business models, you look at your projections, and maybe you've paid back your investors in year 4 or 5, and then that means that by year 8, it's really kicking. So how are you thinking about building your spaces now?
I feel like this is more of a Kevin question, because I want to design them for 30 years, of course. But I mean, realistically, like, doesn't everyone want at least that 10-year bar, that 15-year bar? But yeah, being able to do that, those pivots when these things happen are important. Being able to shift to go, being able to have your larger bar tops so that you can, serve food when you need to. Like, we want to do I'm working on a cocktail bar, just a cocktail bar inside of the new Rochambeau, and we're actually able to do the narrow cocktail bar surface because we have this other revenue stream in the same building, But Kevin.
I mean, we were talking to Sam like a week ago, and I really like what Sam said, which was, when you think of about a 10-year beer, like you want to pay off your investors by year 5, so the last 5 years you're actually making money. But he made a really cool point of making.
Well, I was going to make this point.
Oh, well, sorry. Sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder, Sam. But it was like making it an asset. So, I mean, Sam was really in tune into it in terms of building something in their bar that makes it an asset. So when you sell it off, if you decide to sell your bar, there's more value to your bar than just like the shitty wells that you put into it. So I'll let you lead into Sam talking about it. That's your cue. Wink.
Yeah, so our bar stations are very high quality. We use a thicker steel than a lot of people. They're more expensive than a lot of our competitors. They're very good quality, very sturdy. They don't come in modules. They come in one singular piece where access allows. And we know that probably this bar station will outlive a lot of concepts, right? I don't know what the statistics are. It's probably like marriage. Most venues probably last a few years and then break down. And some, the lucky ones, the institutions, will become, will last for 30 years. And we always hope that our bars will last long. Well, we don't hope they'll last longer than the venues, but that's kind of the reality, right? It's a piece of steel. It's very robust. So one of the selling points that we try to sell in is that this bar station is an asset that will hold value, so that when you pass this venue on, and I think that there's maybe also a little bit of a new mindset, right? Is that people get into a venue, create a concept, and then sell it on, and I don't know how new that is, but it's kind of new to me, who worked as a bartender, didn't really understand how things go. So, we're thinking about we're trying to make people understand that this is an investment that will hold its value. What we also spoke about is that, maybe down the road when, heaven forbid, some of the venues that we've supplied bars to have no further use for it, that we can somehow, facilitate selling that bar station on to somebody else in the future.
And I think just to share, one of the other kind of revenue streams that we've been working on with PCH was, like, a lot of our sales during the pandemic were to-go cocktails, being able to sell whole spirit bottles. So recently I've been procuring and trying to build like a library or inventory of like PCH signature bottles of like Scotch, rum, blah, blah, blah. So that creates a revenue stream if and when we get that opportunity. I don't know, every law is a little different in every state, but if we don't sell food in San Francisco, you're not allowed to sell to-go cocktails or whole bottles anymore until they pass that bill again. But it's going in a good direction that we could, but it could create a revenue stream for us alternatively, because we don't know what's going to happen, and sales go up and down so fast for us. So you create this inventory that you can sell off bottles and sell off inventory, because during 2020 we sold off a lot of our inventory just to make ends meet. And take care of the team. So we're just creating that inventory. It goes kind of the opposite direction. You think if you manage bars, is you don't want a bunch of inventory to sit on because that's money. But I'm going in the opposite direction, thinking that if we can library and sell our stuff, it creates a revenue stream if and when that bill gets passed, and you have a revenue stream of selling bottles at markup at like 30-40%.
So when we're thinking, and we've touched on materials a few times, in passing through this, one of the things that seems to be a long-lasting effect of the pandemic is raising prices and inability to actually procure things. Tina, are you thinking about using materials differently in your interiors based on accessibility and cost?
Yeah, of course. One of the key things that I've learned is that sustainability is important in trying to be smarter about the materials you choose to put into your space, making sure that you can source them locally if possible in order to cut down, transportation costs and emissions, using things that you can easily recycle after when there is, replacement, for example. Yeah.
Kevin, did you make different?
One more thing. I remembered. Okay. One of the things that we kind of did run into, especially with one of the recent bars that I just designed called the Butterscotch Den, is, it was a very, very low budget flip. Luckily, it had like fantastic bones. It was modeled after the Turf Supper Club in San Diego. If you're familiar, you love it. If you haven't been, go, but also go to the Butterscotch Den. But because it was such a low budget flip, and a lot of times there are bars that are lower budget when they're doing their renovations. Sometimes it's about using your materials smarter. So for that bar, we kept the really ugly carpet, we kept the grill in the middle. There's essentially a barbecue in the middle of the restaurant that you grill your own steak. So we kept a lot of, even like the peeling leather booths because it was such a low budget flip, but there was so much surface area on the walls that's where we felt like we needed to make a statement, but we needed to do it smart, economical. So luckily I got a really great wallpaper on sale and I used all my like coupon codes. But one of the coolest features that we did is it's such like a dark space that we really needed to open it up. And luckily it came with this beautiful soffit, and so I switched all the lighting out to like a golden butterscotch colored LED rope light, super inexpensive. You just buy long 15-foot strands of it. So the whole space glows and adds this beautiful intimacy in the space. Another thing is we threw mirrors up on the back bar so that, because it's such a closed-in space, I'm sure you're all familiar when you walk into a room and there's a mirror there, it just kind of opens up the space. So we just did that in a bar, the same kind of principle. So the whole back wall of the bar is inexpensive mirror that allows the guests to feel connected to the space behind them. We also had the logo painted as a mural on the mirror, which is really cool. And then another feature is, paint's usually the most effective way to change a space. And so using a single color of paint, we did a sort of striped pattern, rotating between eggshell and gloss. So it's 7-inch stripes down the wall, and it's all an inexpensive material, but if you use it in a way that creates dimension when the light shines on it, it makes the space a little bit more interesting. Same thing with like tile. If you can find an inexpensive tile, but maybe use 2 different colors and create a cool pattern with it, you're able to cut costs that way.
Kevin, anything you did differently when you were rebuilding PCH because everything you needed to build with was stuck in the Suez Canal?
Yeah, I think the only words of advice I would say is if you're building something, everything has a lead time right now. Is the first thing you ask your contractor is how long is it going to get to get certain pieces of wood. Like the new PCH is a lot of cherry wood, a lot of wood, but we had to pick. We picked the cherry wood because it was beautiful, but it was also because it was the only thing we had that was accessible for us at that time. So that the whole last year of just trying to build this bar from scratch, there was a lot of just roadblocks in terms of what was available. I think we wanted to put a hardwood floor down on it, but there wasn't enough. I think they had 50% of the wood that we wanted. So instead of tiling or putting wood down 50% of the bar, that we decided to keep the original floor. So maybe that's something we do the next year or something. But a lot of it was just like questions of what was readily available for us to use, which really sucked because you want to if you have an opportunity to build something, you want to have it gorgeous and have all the best stuff. But at that point, it was like what is available for us right now.
I want to make sure we have time for some questions, but sort of as a closing thought, do you think that we have new understandings of how we as both operators and guests interact with the physical spaces of bars?
Yes.
Perfect, thanks.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think we're still learning. Like Morgan said at the beginning of this, we're not giving answers, we're giving experiences and sharing what we have. And if you have more feedback or cool ideas that work with that, that's more power to everyone that's in this room, because a lot of it is just we're trying to figure out what we're doing as well. And there were some answers, and there's things that work, and it's like what Tina says is like know your space, know your venue, and how you want to interact with your guest, and what experience you want to give your guest. If it's an experience of just throwing beers out, that's great. That's a great revenue stream. But you want to know your market and know what you want to do in terms of your style of hospitality and how do you want to engage your guests.
Yeah, I think all of these kind of new ways of thinking about operation that we're thinking about, it's, the thing that can't be lost, I think, is that that kind of unquantifiable spark that makes bars so important. I remember on a call, Tina, you made a comment that bars are therapeutic, and I think that what the pandemic has done for me, not being able to go to a bar, has made me really appreciate and understand and realize what an important place they have in society. Not to mention all the people who get their livelihoods from working there, but also guests who go there to get what they need. So I think that we're always having that in the back of our mind, because sometimes it can be really frightening and depressing, right, to think about what could be in the future, what we've been through, of course. But we're trying very much to keep alive that there's opportunities and some positives that can come out of it as well. And that may be a greater appreciation for what bars should be and could be.
That's good. I've got a quote that dovetails nicely with that, which I've been just waiting for a chance to use. So, it's from a political philosopher named Michael Sandel. It says, "Democracy does not require perfect equality, but it does require that citizens share a common life. What matters is that people of different backgrounds and social positions encounter one another and bump up against one another in the course of ordinary life," which I think is about as good a summation of why what we do and the spaces that we build are important. Anything else before we open it up to questions?
Just that design is problem solving, essentially, whether we're going through a pandemic or you're just learning more about your target audience or you are shifting your business. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's fun.
Well, thanks, everybody. Does anybody have questions?
Thank you all so much for being up here and talking today. Super helpful information. My question is mostly directed towards Sam, but I don't know if anybody else would want to weigh in. I had the pleasure of working with you on one of those trolleys last year, but the intro I had to that company was through a bar that we were looking at opening in San Diego, and kind of creating a hybrid model with the Terror version and some of the Paloma series, and it was hard for me to wrap my head around, and I was able to get into a VR studio to do that with your team, and I'm wondering if that's something you continue to do, if it's something you've thrown out, because that blew my mind to be able to physically stand behind the bar and say, okay, what if we move this here? Are we turning that into spatial design? Have you kept working in that way?
Absolutely, and I would say that given the restrictions on travel that the pandemic enforced, even more so. So we work a lot. In fact, every bar station that we produce, we put into virtual reality, and either myself or my partner, who's not here today, Alex, who are bartenders, we get into the station and kind of stress test it, if you like, that things make sense. We worked on a project in Mayfair in London where we had the client in Dubai, we had the interior architect in Florence, we had the project manager in London, and we had ourselves in Oslo. And there were 14 people inside. We modeled the entire venue. So everything, the interior architect and us, we worked together to model up the room. And it was amazing because, all these different people with different interests in that space could, write comments, make notes, discuss. It got a little bit chaotic, I have to admit, with the 14 people. But, many times we've been talking with clients across there was a project we did in Australia. They're in the room, we're in the room, and they are saying, oh, could we bump that shelf up 10 centimeters? It's too low, it's too close. I feel like I'm going to run into it. And being able to do that in real time is a really amazing tool, and especially to bridge those distances that we couldn't travel. So we don't travel a lot to see our clients. We're based out of Oslo, and we do a lot of VR, and that helps to bridge that kind of distance gap, yeah.
Should we just...
Yeah, I think, refrigeration is not our expertise, but we're very much aware of, a bar's need for refrigeration has changed dramatically in the last 10 years, where if you're running a cocktail bar, then, you're expected to have a chilled glass, for example, or something like that. We've just been working with a company to create some bespoke stuff for us, and we're not the only ones who do it, but refrigeration that can easily switch between a refrigerator and a freezer. So the same unit, you can depending on what you're doing that night, depending on what you're doing that week, depending on what your concept is, you can have that flexibility. And I think that word flexibility is really an overarching concept that we're seeing across all of our stuff, is that people want the freedom to change things. I don't know I don't know technical details of refrigeration, but I hope that answered a little bit of the question.
That was a really interesting question. Anybody else got a good one? Yeah, don't screw this up. Hey.
Kevin, what is the specific bar measurement that you changed to incorporate food in your concept? Sam, where are your bar stations and how do I see them? And Tina, can I have your card?
Also, I think my Instagram handle is right down there, Sodaback Inc. as well. Oh, sorry,
It's
I'm
not
not
on
looking at.
screen.
I'm looking. Thank you.
Yeah.
Over here.
Yeah. We have different TVs. We are watching you guys from this
Yeah.
these two ones.
Look down there.
Yeah. I went from a kind of like a 12-inch depth to about 24. So it's big. It's really big. But also the drink rail that we have designed that we make our drinks on is about 15 to 16 inches wide. So it's a very wide. No. Yes. Yeah. So we designed the drink rail, and then we designed the wood top beyond that. So it goes from like 50. I think it's about 15 because it's 2 tins and 2 cheaters there, and then you get the wood top. So it's a bit of a stretch for the bartender to get to the other side if there's a lot of stuff on it. But again, my forefront thinking was just we need to get more stuff on there if we have to serve food for it eventually. Yeah.
How far under? I guess how much space is there between the edge of the drink rail and the edge of the well?
For the die wall. From the die wall to there is 13 inches.
That was a solution when we were building Trick Dog that we hit on, was we wanted to make sure that we had a lot of depth for the guest and a lot of depth for building drinks, and then all of a sudden they're way over there. And so we were just like, well, if we just push the die wall back about 12 more inches and the ice well is almost entirely underneath, and then you drop the well down a little bit and raise the bar up a little bit, and you can still get in it and actually clear.
And then you have to be 5'11" to work there. So.
And then your back is going to be done.
Well, if you're 5'11", you're fine.
How much do hydraulic bar systems cost? I've heard about that more and more, where you can raise it and lower it to the bartender's height.
Our projects you can check out on our website. We have a projects tab where you can see thumbnails of the best ones. we can't keep up with every single project that we do, but there's a lot of really good projects on there where you can see some really good images of different styles of bars that we've done. Yeah.
Anybody else? Questions? Great. All right. Well, thank you all for coming.
you.
Thank you, everybody.
We'll all be around. Feel free to come up and ask us anything that comes up to you later. Check those are our Instagram handles up there. I think, Kevin, you figured out how to check messages on Instagram. So you can message us anything you'd like, and
Don't send it.
happy to help. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.